Hi, I'm Brittany, and my sister is officially a doll. A freaking plastic doll. All thanks to my crazy parents who had adopted her as their daughter. My parents' craziness had gotten me in so much trouble at that point that I ended up standing on the bridge with my hands in the air and the police in front of me. One officer grabbed my arm hard and put me in handcuffs. What was going to happen to me? I started to sob. I wanted to explain that it was all a misunderstanding. It hadn't been real, but it was like they didn't even hear me. They slammed the car door behind me, and just like that, I was on my way to jail. But how exactly did I end up in jail? Well, I'm an only child, but I wasn't always. About a year ago, my mom was pregnant. She was so excited that I was going to have a little baby sister. Unfortunately, our excitement was crushed when my mom went into labor after 7 months. My parents sat with me that day and explained that there was a high chance my sister won't survive, and it was very hard on me to accept. But I did. When I saw my little sister in the hospital, she was too tiny. She hadn't developed enough, and, well, we lost her. After she passed, I was crushed. It seemed like life will never go back to the way it was. But during all of that, my mom did something unbelievable. I came home one day to find a baby on the table. A freaking baby! I yelled to my mom, asking her what was going on. When I got up to the baby, I realized the truth. It wasn't a baby at all. It was a doll that looked real. It was so realistic, I had to touch it to really make sure my mom hadn't kidnapped a baby and plopped it onto our kitchen table. I asked my mom, what was this doll doing here? And she just laughed and said, "What do you mean? That's your baby sister." My mom then scooped up the doll in her arms and started rocking it. I could practically feel my skin crawling. She explained to me that she had named her Julia. I tried not to react. I didn't want my mom to feel bad, but my God, was she being creepy. And it only got creepier from there. It started to seem like every time I turned my back, my mom was rocking the doll. She even started talking to it like it was an actual baby. I tried to ignore it, but man, it was hard. I thought it was bad enough that my mom was rocking the doll. But one day at breakfast, Mom was feeding the doll. I just tried to ignore it, so I went to the kitchen to make my own food, since she was too busy feeding a fake baby to make anything for me. But when I opened the cabinet, pretty much the only food was jars of baby food. I seriously couldn't believe what I was seeing. I sat down at the table to ask my mom if there was anything in the house I could eat, and I sneezed. Just a little sneeze from allergies. In an instant, my mom was on her feet, screaming at me. She was shielding the baby in her arms and yelling at me for trying to contaminate her. I yelled at her again that it was a doll, and she grabbed my wrist. I pulled myself away from her. I couldn't believe the look in her eyes. I was so embarrassed and felt so betrayed that my own mother would put her hands on me. And all that over a doll? What was wrong with her? I thought that would be it. I thought maybe after seeing the look on my face, my mom would understand how wrong she was to hurt me like that. But it only got worse. When I got home every day, my mom would make me take off my shoes, and she would make me scrub myself down with this horrible antibiotic spray, all because she was afraid of me contaminating the baby. She even made me put this plastic suit on. It got to the point where I wasn't allowed to even be in the same room as the doll. I couldn't touch my mom. I couldn't eat in the same room as her. I felt like a prisoner. One day, I came home to find my room completely empty. Every single piece of furniture was gone. But Julia was painted on the wall in a pretty font. My mom told me there was too much of a draft in the baby's nursery, and that I would have to move downstairs into the basement where they had been keeping Julia. I seriously couldn't believe it. I was being moved for a doll? I wanted to yell. I wanted to scream. But I was afraid my mom would hurt me again. Things seemed to level out for a minute. For a few weeks, we lived like that. I avoided my mom, I slept in my new room in the basement, and I went to friends' houses to eat. It was bad, but I was a senior. I thought maybe, just maybe, I could push through and graduate, and that would be the end of it. When my senior portraits came up, I would finally have a moment of happiness with my family. What happened instead was a nightmare. I arrived at school to have our family portrait taken. My school has a long-standing tradition of having the whole family involved, and I thought it might make my parents act more normal. Unfortunately, what I got was so much worse. My mom walked into the studio with a baby carriage. I was mortified. All my friends and teachers and their families were standing off to the side, watching my mom wheel this doll in. When we went to pose for the picture, and my mom insisted that Julia had to be in the photo, I started to lose my mind. I told my mom I couldn't let that happen. My mom yelled at me for not respecting my baby sister. I screamed that my baby sister was dead and that Julia was a dumb doll. I could feel everyone's eyes on me. Some were laughing, some were horrified, but me, I was just furious. I couldn't calm down. I picked up the doll and was about to throw it across the room. My mom screamed. I could see her sobbing. She just yelled at me to leave and never come back. I rushed home to start packing my things. I decided to sleep at a friend's house, but when I opened my phone, I quickly saw that wasn't going to be an option anymore. My social media accounts lit up. Someone had taken a GIF of me yelling and made a meme out of it. It was everywhere. People were calling me names. People were posting pictures of dolls on my page and tagging me in them. Oh, it was a flood of bullying, and I couldn't handle it. I tried my best to ignore what was happening. And I kept reassuring myself that when I'm old enough, I was going to leave this madhouse. But then I was shocked to discover that my parents had invited a psychologist to treat me because I wasn't accepting my sister as part of the family. And that was my breaking point. The next day, I heard my mom and my dad come home. I hid in the closet and waited for them to go to bed. I knew what I had to do. All of this was that stupid doll's fault. I had to do something about this, once and for all. Once I knew they were asleep, I rushed into my old bedroom. I picked up the doll. Without giving it a second thought, I raced outside. I walked as fast as I could. If my mom caught me before I did what I was going to do, it was going to be too late. On my way across town, a few people stopped me, excited to see my baby. I snapped at all of them. I couldn't believe everyone thought it was a real baby. I started to panic a bit. I had to get rid of the doll somehow. I had to do something, so it would never be found ever again, so my life could go back to normal. I started to cross a bridge onto the other side of town, but I was stopped when I heard the rushing water underneath me. Now, in retrospect, this wasn't my best idea, but I needed to get rid of that doll. All I could think about was that people would finally stop making fun of me. Maybe my mom would actually pay attention to me now. I started to walk over the bridge, ready to drop it. But my heart pounded when 4 police cars whipped directly in front of me. I stumbled back, totally terrified. Their sirens were deafening. One of the cops ordered me to drop to the ground. I did what he said, and I felt the handcuffs clamp around my wrists an instant later. Who did they think I was? What the heck was happening? I was asked over and over what was going on with the tears in my eyes. I started to panic. Was my life about to be over? Someone kept yelling at me, asking where the baby was. Then it hit me. They didn't know it was a doll. I tried to explain myself. I tried to tell them it was just a doll, but they wouldn't listen to me. It didn't help that I could barely get a word out. The police officer put me in the back of the car and took the doll from me. I was sobbing, scared out of my mind. I was really about to go to jail. When we arrived, I was thrown into a holding cell for questioning. Everything was dark. The school thought I was a freak, my mom was a freak, and I was sitting in jail. I never thought my life could get so messed up so quickly. After a few hours, someone came to the questioning room and sat with me. He was a social worker. He started showing me one picture after the other of my parents' doll and kept asking, what did I see? I saw a doll. Every single time. What did he want from me? But then 2 giant men came and took me against my will. When I woke up, my legs and my arms were tied to a hospital bed. I was put in a psych ward. I stayed there for a month before my parents came to see me for the first time. How dare they? I was about to attack them when, oh my God, was this the doll? I remained calm as my mother got closer. And when I looked at the doll, I was shocked to see that it was a real life baby. A real live baby. Did they kidnap a real baby now? My mother told me that when Julia was born, we almost lost her, and I accepted her death too soon. But Julia survived, and I was in denial, even delusional. I was suffering the same symptoms of schizophrenia my grandfather had before he died. For the first time, it started to make sense. It was me. Something was wrong with me. I started to remember flashbacks of Mom not allowing me to get too close to the baby, how my parents moved my stuff to a separate room, and my relatives' stares when I said my sister was a doll. I then hugged my mom and cried. As for right now, I'm a whole new person. I take my meds on time, and I keep my mental health stable.
When I was born, my dad decided to name me Hope. He told me that my birth was a blessing, and he gave me a name to reflect that. But hope was something that was missing in my life. In fact, I spent most of my childhood feeling unhappy and alone, and the reason for that might surprise you. I guess I'd better start at the beginning and tell you all about my family. My background is very unusual, but I didn't realize that growing up. I thought it was normal, but I was very wrong. As a child, I lived with my mom, my dad, and my 3 younger siblings. But this is where it gets weird. My dad was also married to 2 other women, and these women both had children with my dad as well, which means I had 10 siblings overall. I grew up in a really tight community in the middle of the countryside, away from the rest of the world. My dad was the leader. There were other families in the community too. Those families were all headed by men with multiple wives. But those men all knew that Dad was the leader, and if he wanted, he could take their wives away from them and he could marry them instead. We lived in caravans and we didn't go to a normal school. The moms taught us cooking and other skills around the home, and Dad taught us all about our religion that he was a founder of. He told us that he was the most important person in the world and that we should all worship him. He said that one day the world as we know it would end and it would just be our community that would survive. He taught us that we needed to make our community as big as possible so we had the numbers to make a new world, and we would achieve that by the women in the community having as many babies as they could. We were never exposed to the outside world, so I didn't know how other people lived. Our community used to move around a lot, always to areas as far away from others as possible. We lived off the grid. No TVs, no radio, no newspapers. We kept animals for food, and we grew our own crops. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, yeah, right, this sounds so bizarre, and I must be exaggerating. But this really was my life. There are communities like this out there. It's just that they are hidden away, and people don't see them. It sounds really unusual, but for me, this was normal. When I was 10, we moved to a new campsite. This was different from the previous places where we had lived, as we weren't isolated from the rest of the world. We were in our own field, but right next to us was a campsite with other people in it, or outsiders, as Dad called them. Dad told us all that we were banned from going outside of our field or talking to anyone over the fence. He told us that they were dangerous and a threat to our community. But one day, I saw 2 boys playing football next to our field, and one of them accidentally kicked their football over the fence. They called out, asking if they could have their ball back. I was nervous. but I took the ball and I threw it back over. Then one of them started talking to me. It was the first time I had ever spoken to an outsider, and I was surprised that they weren't scary. They were nice. The next day, I snuck over the fence and went to play with them. That was when I started to realize that my life was different from others. They lived with their mom and dad their dad had no other wives. They were allowed to watch TV and play computer games, which I had never seen before. They had never heard of my dad and didn't believe that he was a savior. They thought the whole idea was funny. At first, I thought that they were wrong. But after a while, I started to question what my dad told me, and indeed my whole life. It was when I was 13, I knew that things had to change. Over the years, I had snuck out of the community many times to see how others lived. I was liking the world on the outside more than the life inside. No one knew that I snuck out, but I had almost been caught several times. I knew I couldn't keep this up. Another change in my life had been my mom. I could see that she was really unhappy. She had had another 2 babies in the last 3 years and was struggling to look after them all, especially as Dad had announced that he was soon going to marry another 2 women. That means he would have 5 wives. So I came up with an idea. I told Mom that I had been sneaking out and I had met outsiders. I told her that the world out there was better than our lives here. It took a while, but I convinced her that we should run away. We came up with a plan that one night, Mom, me, and my 5 siblings would all sneak out and try and get as far away from the community as possible. She told me that she would sneak away from Dad that night and come to get me and my siblings. That night came, and I waited up all night for Mom to come and take us away, but she never did. The next day, she acted as nothing had happened. She refused to acknowledge that she had ever planned to run away. She said that our home was in the community, and that was the end of that conversation. A few days later, my dad broke some news to me. He told me that he had found out that I had been sneaking out and that he forbade it. But instead of punishing me, he had forgiven me, and that he had good news. He had arranged for me to marry one of the men in the community the next day. My new husband would keep an eye on me and ensure that I never snuck out again. The man he had chosen for me to marry already had a wife, and he was 43 years old. I was only 13. I couldn't think of anything worse. I was too scared to tell him that I didn't want to marry that man, so I told my mom instead. She said that I had no choice. I had to obey my dad. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was so scared about getting married. So scared, I knew I had to do something. I got up, packed a few clothes in a bag, and crept out of the caravan. I moved silently, frightened that someone would see me. Nobody did. I climbed over a fence and into the next field. I then ran as fast as I could and got out of the campsite and headed down a road. No idea where I was or where I was going. Exhausted, I walked through the night, and then when it was light, I hitchhiked as far away as possible. I asked a driver to drop me off in the middle of the city. I didn't tell him where I had come from, but he could see that I was scared, so he gave me some money for food before he drove off. I'd never been to a city before, and it was terrifying. I considered going back home, but I had no idea how to get back to the campsite or where it was, and I knew if I went back, I would probably be punished for my disobedience. I had made my choice. That night, I slept in the shop doorway. I was cold, hungry, and frightened. During the day, I begged for money for food and drink, and every night, I tried to find somewhere safe to sleep. I did this for a while, and I was scared all of the time. I had no idea how I would survive. That was 10 years ago, and some days, I can't believe that was my life. I was eventually found by the police, who put me in a children's home. After a while, I was fostered with a normal family. I went to school, and although it took a lot of readjusting, I managed to get some qualifications. I am a social worker now. I spend my days helping children in need. These children had difficult childhoods. My experience has helped me understand these children, and I'm so pleased that I can help them. But some days, I still feel really sad. My foster family was amazing, and I'm still in touch with them, but I miss my real mom and siblings so badly. I don't know where they are now, and the younger ones won't even remember me. I probably have even more siblings that I've never met. I have no idea where they are, so getting in touch with them would be next to impossible. I just hope that wherever they are safe.